Hi everyone, welcome to this video. We will be creating this project here. As you can see, it's a simple view that has just one label and then it has an inline frame. And inside this inline frame, we see a custom component from Chart.js.org. And you can interact with this component, such as hover here. So this number of countries is coming from our MySQL database here. So this query is what we're using, 37, 51, 58. If you look here, you have 37, 51, 58. Basically counted the number of countries each continent has in this data set that came with my MySQL installation. So this is a custom component, once again, from chartjs.org. And by the end of the video, you will also understand how to manipulate these charts and create your own custom charts. That being said, let's jump in and get started. So let's launch our Ignition designer. It doesn't matter, again, what type of designer you're using, if you're using the Maker Edition or if you're using a full installation of Ignition, or if you're using the trial. This should all be the same as long as you have the WebDev module installed. Okay, so the first step, let's actually go to chartjs.org and look at some of the charts we're going to implement. So as you can see here, there's line charts, bar charts, and then mixed. I forgot what this chart is called. But let's look at some of the getting started. Okay, so we have some code here. This looks like HTML, something you would embed in an HTML page. Okay, so let's go ahead and create let's create a WebDev resource, namely the Python resource. This might be surprising to some of you because well, let me double down. So what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to query our database and return some data that we can then graph with the bar graph. There are several ways to do this. So one way you can do this is create an API for the database querying part with the Python resource, and then create a page that references the API, and then the API will pull in our data from our database, and then our text resource, our HTML page, will actually use that data and embed it into the chart. But I found out that you can do it in an even easier way. So if you create a new Python resource here, if you go to your WebDev module, if you don't have this, you will probably need to install it. Hit the new Python resource. Let's do get country info, because that's what our query will be. Okay, and then as you can see, our method here will be do get, or it'll be a get HTTP method. So now that we created this Python resource, let's hit launch WebDev, launch resource, and see what it looks like. So this hello world text is just coming from here. And since we can write Python scripts in here, in this get country info, this HTTP method scope, since we can write regular Python, right? We can query a custom property. This is what I'm thinking. Or either query directly from the database or bind to a custom property, something like that, and then inject it into our HTML. So this HTML, realize that it doesn't have to be necessarily this simple. We will write more complex HTML. So let's go ahead and get started then. Let's go back to our Chart.js. So if you haven't used Chart.js, it's an open source collection of different types of charts and graphs. So you can look at some of the examples here. So line charts. There's a basic line chart, add data, There you go. Time scale. There are different types of progress bar. Okay, so you can look through this on your own time. But let's click the get started here, and this is where I found this code. Let's go back to our designer. Let's go ahead and move this. So what I found out about working with WebDev and Ignition is that you have to save often. That way, if something goes wrong, you'll know exactly what it is. Because sometimes things that you would expect to work don't work. So let's go ahead and save. Just double check to make sure that, okay, so it does the exact same thing. To make sure that it's still working, that we don't make any breaking changes. Okay, let's go back to our web browser here, Chart.js. If you go to chart.js.org and then go to get started, and then you'll see this sample script. Let's go ahead and copy this and paste it. We're going to modify it, but it's a good place to begin. So copy, and then you want to paste it within your body tags. Paste. There we go. So this canvas here is the HTML component. Everything within this scripting is JavaScript. But if we go ahead and save this, you'll notice that nothing displays, right? Click the F12 key on your keyboard if you're in Chrome. So we see that we have an error here, uncaught reference error. Chart is not defined on line 8. Okay, if we look at line 8 here, my chart, oh, line 9. So this chart, Ignition has no way of knowing what this chart here is, right? Because we didn't actually import anything from Chart.js. So let's go ahead and go to the integration tab. Actually, usage, installation, there it is. And then go to your CDN. So there are a couple ways to do this. If you're running a Node.js server, which you probably are not because we're talking about Ignition. But if you are, you can use npm or yarn to install Chart.js. But in our case, we're going to use a CDN. Let's open this guy here. Then you can see all of these different imports that we can use. Let's go ahead and copy this chart.bundle.mid.js script tag. And then we can also, I'll show you what it is. All it is basically a minified JavaScript file that you should be able to just paste here and look at it. There you go. So most of the spaces are removed. Everything is super compressed to save on file size, right? If we search for chart, we see that there is a definition for chart here and many other places. Okay, so it's likely that we were just missing an import. So let's go ahead, once again, copy this script tag, go back to our designer, and paste the script tag here. Okay, let's go ahead and save. This will not work, but I just wanted to show this for troubleshooting purposes. If you paste your script tag, your import, after your definition here, right, chart is still not going to be found. Let's save and go back to the browser and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Same error here, chart is not defined. But if we put it in like you're supposed to put it in at the right place, we should be able to save there, go back here, and there you go. There's your chart. So that was quite easy. Okay. So we will modify this chart here shortly, but let's embed it into a view. This is also pretty confusing for people who haven't dealt with WebDev components. There are also several ways to do this. It depends on what you're embedding. If you're embedding like a form, you can use a markdown component. That does have its limitations though. But I've used markdown components, and then there are a couple properties that have HTML in the name, like escape HTML. You want to turn that off. And there was one other one that I don't remember. But we're going to use an inline frame in this video, an iframe. Let's go ahead and create a new folder. Just name it charts. Let's create a new view. We're going to get country info. Let's make it of type flex, and then we can set a page URL right away. That way we can see it in our browser. So let's put in a label just so that we remember. Okay. Let's set some properties here. One of my pet peeves is that, as you can see here, if I type in color and then hit tab, I lose focus. So then I have to go back and then type in white. Also, if I type in background, color, camel case, I also lose focus. But if I type it in with a dash, like the CSS property, then I don't, which is weird. Maybe that's by design. Interesting why I lost my background color. So if I type in background dash color, there we go. Let's also add a little bit of padding. Okay, that's good enough for me. And then let's drag on an inline frame. Okay, let's set it to grow to fill the rest of the screen, and we're going to, so there are a couple properties that are useful with an iframe. Your source here will be a website. So for example, .weather.gov, but realize we can't do this with every website because of some security settings, or security settings on some websites. There we go. So if we specify the protocol and then the location, it'll pull it in, basically be an embedded browser, right? But we can't. So if we go to, let's actually go to automation. If we go to Inductive Automation's website and copy this, we will see that we will not be able to embed. There's an error. It has to do with the refer policy is one part of it. There are things you can play around with here, but some websites can't be embedded is the simple explanation there. I don't fully understand it myself, but we do know that our local web component here can be embedded. There you go. So we embedded it into our into our view now. So let's go ahead and save this, and then we can launch this view, launch session, shoot, I forgot what I called it. Get country info, okay. There we go. We can see our graph. Of course, it doesn't look very nice because there are some size constraints here. So it's not filling our page correctly, but this is something that we can modify. So let's go back to our WebDev and then play around with some of these settings. So as you can see, this my chart here is referencing the HTML component here, my chart by ID. So you can see that the ID is set to my chart. It's a common way to do to intertwine HTML components and JavaScript scripting to get an element by ID. Of course, this script has to be farther along in our page than the actual definition. If we move this canvas below the script, it's not going to be found for the same reason if we move the import below where we define this chart object or try to make an instance of this chart object here, it won't be found. So you just have to be cognizant of where you put in your imports and where you define things, because it will nip you in the bud if you let it. Okay, so here's your type of graph. It's a bar graph. If you change this to a line graph, it'll probably work as well, but it'll just look funky. There you go. There's a line graph. Okay. Of course, we wanted the bar graph. Okay. And then our labels. Okay. And then our labels here are just define what each bar is and the number of tallies each one. So like this one is green, number of votes is 5. I don't know why I can't clear my throat. Okay. So this is good. We want one more color. These are nice pastel-like colors. So let me just change this to something random. Okay. Okay. And then change this. Oops. But we want our opacity to be set to 1 to be solid. There we go. Let's see if we have one more bar. Okay, we still have the 6. Okay. Let's see, maybe we need to name it here. So all of this is written in the documentation, which we will look at here in a second. Okay, let's go back to our session. Refresh. There's random, but there's also no value for random, which makes sense because we didn't define our number of votes here. So let's put in 9. Okay. And then you should be able to, there you go, random. And it actually fits well with the rest of these colors. Okay, so that is how you add a bar for the bar chart. Let's pivot a little bit and write our query. So when I installed MySQL in the last video, I also installed Workbench, and one of the components I installed additionally was the samples and examples, or I forgot what it was called, but essentially gives you 3 test schemas, 3 test databases with some tables. So let me open Workbench and I'll show you some sample data I decided to query, and then I thought it would be, a good example of how to query data from a database and then insert it into this chart here and then display it for in our view or wherever we want to display it. So let me go ahead and open Workbench. So it will have to do with country. Let me just close these tabs. If you've never used Workbench before, it's a very useful tool. I would say it's much better than the included tool in Ignition. The tool called Database Query Manager or Browser. Obviously, it's a different, there's a different use case for each tool. But the MySQL Workbench can do everything this can do here, writing queries and returning them, and a lot more. So let's go back here. In this world schema here, there's a table called country. Let's select rows, and here is just a table of countries. Of course, it's very outdated. I went to the US. Here's US. And then I looked at the head of state, and it was George W. Bush, who was in office from 2000 to 2008 or 2001, something like that. So this data set is outdated. But what I want to do is I want to count all of these countries and group them by continent. So should be a pretty simple query. So what we want to do is, we want to count from world country. So if we just do this, it'll count the number of countries. So there's 239 countries. But we want to group by, I believe it was called continent. Yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, sweet. So these are referring to the number of countries on each continent. But we also would like to know what continent these are referring to, right? So I believe we can just say continent. Okay, so that looks good. This looks like something that's graphable in a bar graph here. As num countries. It's even longer. Okay. Anyway, this query here is what we are looking at. So you have your continent, and then you have your number of countries within that continent. So let's go ahead and copy this. We might need to modify it a little bit for it to work inside the Ignition, our Ignition project. So let's go ahead and create a named query here. New query, we're going to say get countries by continent. Create named query. We can delete these parameters here. We're not going to need them. Of course, you have to select your database connection. If you don't know how to add a database, watch my last video. We go through the steps to add a MySQL database, but Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, all of those should be similar. Select my database here. Okay, so this actually refers to something else. Let's go to our, so I remember why we don't see our world schema. Let's go back to our Ignition. Let's log into our Ignition gateway. And I'll show you why we can't see our world schema. So let's go here. If we go to config, Okay, and then go to connections, under database, go edit. Here we're specifying a database. I wonder if we can remove that. Okay, and then save changes. Okay, it's still valid, but now if we go here, okay, now if we go here, interesting. Okay, there should be a way that we don't need to define. Oh, okay. I think I know why. So let's paste our query for MySQL in here and then go to testing and hit execute query. Okay, so all we have to do now, we have 3 databases, remember? So we have Sakila, I don't know what that means, sys, and world. So if we added in our database connection, if we added the database here, so for example world, we won't be able to see the other 3. So what I did was I took this part out here. You can see that it's still a valid setting, but then when you go to use it in your named queries, you have to specify the schema and then the table within that schema, and then you can still query, as we saw here, execute query. Okay. Let's actually rename this count as can't spell today. Okay. Number of countries. Maybe we might run into issues with that and with the hashtag sign. So okay. Okay, this is good enough. Let's save here and then go back to our WebDev. So now what we want to do is we want to get these countries by continent, and then we want to inject them into this data section here. So we can see that it's just a list, right? And then our labels, so our labels will be the continents, and then our data points will be the number of countries per continent, right? Okay, so there is a function, data is equal to system.data.run prep query. If you hit the F1 key when you're in the designer, you should get the documentation. Okay, let's go to system.data.run prep query. Oh, system.db, sorry. I knew something didn't sound right. Okay, so this should be DB. We see, so run prep query. Prep query means it's a prepared query, which we can pass in the name of our named query and then return our data. You can read up on the system.db whatever else functions here in the documentation. So we see that it requires a query, which is a string, our arguments, which is a list. So everywhere there's a question mark, we put that in this list here. It requires a database, okay, and transaction ID. And then it returns a Pi data set. Okay. Okay, I found out why our query wasn't working, and it's because this guy right here. Okay, let's go. It's always a good idea to read the documentation before you jump into something head first. Okay, so I searched system.db, and I remembered that run prep query is not what we want because we didn't write a query, right? We tried to pass in a path. So what we should have been using is to run name query, this function here. Okay, so if we change this run prep query to run named query, okay, and this function, this function takes parameters if we have any, transaction ID, and then get key. These are optional, and I think parameters are also optional. So let's take this out and just pass in the path. Since we have no parameters, remember, it just queries a set of data, and there's no where clause. Okay, so let's go ahead and return prematurely. So let's return this basically. But instead of returning that, let's return, I just want to see what our data looks like to make sure that we're actually querying it. Okay. So let's write a quick test plus string. So we're going to map something, okay, and then we can close out our body and close out our HTML. Okay, so this here will completely ignore this entire thing. This is how you can easily test your Python resources. So let's go ahead and save, go back to our browser, and then do this. Okay, so we're completely bypassing all of this here. It's returning prematurely. Okay, so in here, I want to map lambda row. Yeah, lambda row. I just want to do something with that, and then our data set will be system.dataset.toPy data set, and then pass in data here. Okay. Our data here is returned as a dataset object, which is difficult to work with in Python. So we're going to convert it into a 2Py dataset. This map is going to look at each row, and it's going to put it inside a p tag plus string row. Okay, I have no idea if this is going to work. Okay. So if this works correctly, we should just see a list of all of our rows. They might just be appended one to another, might not be in a column. So maybe we can add a break. Okay, let's go ahead and see what we created. Cannot concatenate string and list objects. Okay, so that's, I think, something I can solve. Oh, I see why. So a map returns a list. So let's just join them together, save, go back here, and we are not getting anything. Okay, I might have gotten ahead of myself. Okay, so let's back up. So PyData is equal to system.dataset.toPy then pass in your data set there. Let's slow down a little bit. Let's just return the length to see if we're even getting 7. Okay, that's good because we have 7 continents. Okay, so we are interacting with this PyData. Okay, what we want to do is we want to extract all of our continent names and then put them here. And we want to extract all of our values and embed them here. Okay, so let's split it up. This testing thing we can remove. Yeah, I'm not sure why it didn't work. Map lambda row, should be row. String row, and then PyData. So I'm not sure why it didn't return anything last time. It still isn't returning anything. What if we do row 0? Okay, there we go. We have all of our continents, and then if we do row 1, we should have all of our values. There we go. Of course, we can't tell what that is and where it splits up. Let's go back here. So we actually found an easy way. To retrieve our values here. Okay, so let's say continents will equal map lambda row 0, and then our iterable is PyData. This should be a list here of our continents, and then our num countries should equal map lambda row 1, and also the same thing. Okay. String, let's just make sure. Okay. There we go. We have a list of our continents. Sweet. And let's just make sure this one also works, which it should. There we go. Okay. We can remove this here. If you don't know what a map function does, read up on that, but let me actually show you because I didn't understand it for the longest time. And I use it all the time now, where appropriate. So what a map function does is it maps each value of an iterable to a function. So for example, we can define a function double. And then pass in a value here, x, return 2 times x. And then print double 4, string, of course. Right, we get 8. Okay, so say we have a list. Say you have a list of values you want to double. You want to double all of these. So say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. you want to do the same operation. You want to double each of the numbers in this list. So it doesn't need to be a list. It can be any iterable. So what you can do here is MP is equal to map your function name, so this double, and then your iterable ls. What it's going to do for you is it'll return a list. It'll return a list of every item in your iterable, in this case, this list, after it has been run through this function. So it'll map. So for example, our output in this case. So let's do this by hand. Let's take 1, put it in this function. 2 times 1 is 2. Let's take 2, put it in this function. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. Let's run 3 through this function. 2 times our parameter 3. So here's our parameter. Here, in this case, it's 3. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. And 10. So it takes an iterable here and runs every item in this iterable through this function. You don't necessarily need only one parameter. Sometimes you want more parameters. You can do x, y, and then return y times x or something like that. So this should be our output, right? This is what we would expect. And if we print that's what we should get. So all it does, it takes your function object. Notice how it's not, I don't have parentheses here. It's just your function object, your iterable here, and then it maps, right? That's what the function's called. Every item in your iterable, so in our list here, it'll do whatever function we specified on first item, second item, all the way up to the nth item. Okay, so what does the lambda do then? Well, if you have a simple function like this, double, you may not want to define an entire function, right? So you may not want to write all this. So lambda, all it is an unnamed function. You don't have to define it beforehand. Lambda, let's just do lambda row. Row here is a name you're giving for each item in this iterable. So for example, if we just do row, it should just return our iterable back to us, right? MP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? What if we do row times 2? Here's our function again. So we can call this anything. We can call it x, just as we did in this function. And there we go. So this is what, if you were confused, hopefully you're less confused now. Hopefully you're not more confused. Lambda is an unnamed function, and we just specify the operation here. So here's you're naming each element in your iterable, and then after the colon, you define the operation you want done. So for simple operations like this, you just define your iterable and your function, and then you map them. And this, of course, returns a list. But if you want to map it to string, you can just do so quote, quote. So this will be an empty string, and then dot join, and then join the map. Okay. Anyway, all that blabbing. So this will make more sense here now, because so we're iterating. PyData is a two-dimensional list, essentially. So here we're iterating over PyData, which in turn means we're iterating over the rows, right? And then we're taking each, and the row has two values inside of it. We're taking here continent, this, and then the number of countries here. Okay, so and then what we want to do is, so here, instead of that list, we want to actually specify our list. We want to specify our continents list. And then in, oh crap. So this, we want to specify our num countries list, actually, here. Here, num countries. And then in here, we want to, I call it injecting, because we are putting code into our HTML here. I'm not sure if that's the right term. Okay, so there we go. We're taking our continents, putting it inside our HTML, and then taking our row number of countries per continent, putting it in here. Let's go ahead and save and see what happens. Okay. Cannot concatenate string and list objects. Okay, I think I know how to fix that. String. We might have to do something else if this doesn't work. Unexpected string, get country info 12. Okay, 12. Oh, we might have to do it this way here. So define our string and then do comma dot join our list of continents, and then do the same thing here. This takes a little bit of playing around with. Our number of countries. So let's go here. Expected string long found. Okay, so I figured out why it wasn't working. So there's a two-part solution here. We're casting each value of the iterable into a string. So of course, these values are already strings, and then these will be turned into a string. And then the next step would have been to cast the entire list as a string. Okay, and this should work here. Okay, let's go back to refresh. There we go. So here we are finally. We can click on the continent, Europe, number of votes. It's not really number of votes, it's number of countries on that continent. But we can see that we get our values here, 37, 51, 58, right? Africa has 58 countries according to this list here. So Africa has 58, there we go. So two more things I want to do in this video. Let's change this number of votes thing. Let's also make this graph grow and shrink with our page or wherever it's going to be embedded, or at least set a usable size to it because it is pretty large here. Okay, so let's look in here wherever it defines number of votes. Okay, number of votes here. Number of countries. Okay, I'm assuming it's going to change this here and also when you click on it. There we go. It's a really nice chart. And you can see that we can interact with it here. So even in a perspective view, right, you still get the same tooltips. This is in a perspective view. You still get the same interaction as you would just a regular website or a web page. Okay, so change that. We have one more thing to do. Let's put our body here in a div tag. Div, and then we can change this here style is equal to height 400 pixels, width 400 pixels. Let's see if that changes. There we go, much more manageable. And we can see our labels changed as well. So there we go, we have a nice looking graph. Let's review once again what we did. So we put it inside a div, the canvas. I'm not sure why this wasn't working or what this was supposed to do. An improvement to this project would be to make it make this chart grow and shrink, but it might be a limitation of how Chart.js components work. So let's go ahead and set it again to 400 by 400. We want height to be 400 pixels, and then width, maybe we want 600. Go. Maybe it needs to be a cube. Okay, we'll leave it at that. There you go. There you have it. Here's the finished graph. We do see that it's cutting off here, so maybe we can make our height a little bit bigger. So let's make our height here 450 pixels. Oh. There we go. So this is the completed project here. If you found that useful, let me know in the comments. Also, nobody's on my Discord. Let me show you, this is pretty sad. So there's not a single person has visited my Discord. If you have questions, ask them there. I will be more likely to answer them. Okay, anyway, let me know if you need any help in the Discord or in the comments. I'll try to do my best. So to summarize what we did, we queried data from our database. We displayed it in a graph from Chart.js. So we defined an HTML component. We also set up a Chart.js chart and then put our data inside that Chart.js chart, put the chart inside an inline frame, and displayed it in our view here. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and come back next time for some more garbage.